In our nation's 246-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He is a coward. A real man wouldn't lie to his supporters. He lost his election, and he lost big. I know it, he knows it, and deep down, I think most Republicans know it. Lynn and I are so proud of Liz for standing up for the truth, doing what's right, honoring her oath to the Constitution, when so many in our party are too scared to do so. Liz is fearless. She never backs down from a fight. There is nothing more important she will ever do than lead the effort to make sure Donald Trump is never again near the Oval Office. And she will succeed.
Welcome back to the Professor Penn podcast. This is David Penn with you tonight. This is episode number 102, The Failure of the Conservative Movement. That'll be our subject tonight, and I think it's very important that we work our way through that. Bear with me. I've been gone, as you know, for a week. I was on the road. That was an interesting experience. I got down to my destination. I had traveled in an airplane, something I don't like to do, and a gentleman was sitting next to me and coughed on me the entire trip. Now, in my mind, I got quite direct with this man, but of course, in reality, you're stuck in a plane. What can you do? He coughed on me, coughed on me, coughed on me. I got down to my destination, and within 12 hours, I'd spiked about 100, 203 fever. And I'd gone all the way down there. Now I'm sick in a hotel room. Whoa, you know what ran through my mind? Training. Training. It's so easy to be sick at home, but when you're sick on the road and you have 4, 5, 6 meetings a day, every day, and you went all the way there, I had to go do those meetings. So I took my Advil. I didn't cough. I didn't have any, my nose wasn't stuffy. My body was just killing whatever went in there. And I'm going to these meetings and I'm thinking to myself, boy, this is a challenge because I didn't feel good and yet I had to perform. That again is part of the secret society idea, which we've talked about many times. How do I function when I can't function? I often think, man, it's pretty easy to go to a business meeting. What if you're on the front lines and you got 103 fever and you got to fight? These are things that we need to consider, or at least I consider, as I go down the road of my life trying to become a better version of myself. And at one point, I prayed. I mean, I was sick. I prayed. It was like, whoa, I don't want to have to go to the hospital here on the road. And when, you're spiking a fever and you're getting, you know, not right in the head from the fever, you start thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So here's what I did. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for creating the light and the dark. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for creating me in your image. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for making me an American. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for making me free. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for healing the blind. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for feeding the people. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for releasing the bound. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for raising up the downtrodden. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for creating the heavens and earth. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for providing for all my needs. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for directing my path. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for our American courage. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for crowning America with glory. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for restoring strength to the weary. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds. Thank you for sending your only Son to die on the cross that I might be saved. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Pardon me, my King, for I have willfully transgressed. For you pardon and forgive. Blessed are you, God and King of all worlds, who is gracious and ever willing to forgive. And I believe that I received health for all my flesh. And I recovered. So in this case, my prayer was answered. And you're going to say, well, Professor Penn, it was just a cold or a flu. How was I supposed to know? I didn't get it diagnosed. I didn't run to the doctor. Not saying that you shouldn't. Maybe you need to go to the doctor. You have to know yourself. When is something demanding professional attention? I knew I was going to be okay. I knew it. I knew it. I believed that I'd receive health for all my flesh. Now you're going to say, if you're here and you're a leftist because you've been following me on X, and you're going, who is this guy? Is this a religious program? No, we're not doing a religious program. We're doing a political program. But having the right frame of mind helps us in our political activity, in our daily activity. All these prayers, you could strip out the creator part and just be thankful. I mean, I'm thankful. And what I find is, interestingly, a lot of people do not have Thanksgiving. They have a sense of entitlement or a sense of anger or some other kind of mindset. And I'm not saying that I stand in judgment of them. I'm saying that life is a process where we're continuously refining ourselves. That's the work of the secret society, that continual refinement that brings us into a deeper understanding of life and ourselves within life. You know, you could make it a religious concept, you can make it not a religious concept. But if you're not at all contemplating the meaning of your life within the context of our current situation, well, what can I say? It's a choice. You're an American citizen. You're just choosing to not be engaged. And there's a lot of people that do that. In fact, probably most people are still choosing to go about their daily life and not consider the threats and the propaganda and the danger and the change that's confronting all of us. They're just going along for the ride. They're prioritizing other things in their lives, and that's not necessarily right or wrong. That's what they're choosing to do. They're American citizens, and they're free to do it. We have this experiment here in our country, the United States of America, where the human will, free choice, the choice of the citizens, determines the future political path of the country. We don't live in a world that's dominated by kings and queens or autocrats, that their will determines how I live my life. It's the collective vote of all of us that determines the future path of the country. And, you know, for the entire history of the United States of America, we've had a group on one side and a group on another side, the opposite side, that are very ultra engaged and informed, that seek to convince, cajole, create the future that they believe is right. And I'm not going to demonize people who don't agree with me. And that demonization is being pursued because in our elite intellectual institutions, the PhDs that deliver the message, they're interested in polarizing and demonizing because they have an agenda, and their agenda is that they believe that the post-World War II Democrat liberal order, which they are supporters of and they're on the payroll of, they believe that that's the end of history, that that is the best and truest expression of human political activity. So they want to demonize anyone that doesn't agree with that Democrat liberal order and all of its values and virtues, such as they are. And we started out with a clip of Dick Cheney, who is alleged to be a very conservative Republican. Guess what? Dick Cheney is an ardent supporter of the post World War II Democrat liberal order. Cheney came to prominence during the Reagan administration. This guy's been around a long time. This guy believes in what John Kennedy disparagingly referred to as the Pax Americana, or the American Imperial Project. Now, Kennedy, and we've just played it many times, talked about the peace that he's seeking, the kind of peace that makes life worth living, is not based on the coercion of the American military. But Dick Cheney, this man that sits up there and pontificates in his cowboy hat, uh, talking about Liz Cheney, his daughter, who's been bounced out of the Congress and has been censured and rebuffed by the Wyoming Republican Party. In other words, in her own home state, she's persona non grata within her own political community. She is one of the most ardent advocates of making sure that Donald Trump does not make it back to the White House. And they make it about Donald Trump. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to keep talking about conservative failure, the failure of the conservative movement, and how it's thrashing about here like a wounded animal, attempting to maintain its relevancy and the scam that it is, because it is a scam, as we're going to go into. And I got these people, man, on X, one of the most strident set of voices and most constant set of posts is Republican conservatives, alleged Republican conservatives, who are critical of Donald Trump. They call the Trump supporters maggots, MAGATS, and that's not very nice. Instead of MAGA, now they're maggots, and they look down on these people. I was watching Morning Joe this morning, and they were making a big deal that the folks that really like Donald Trump make less than $50,000 a year. That's their pitch. And that's the whole point of conservative failure, which we're going to draw into deeply. What they were saying on Morning Joe is, if you don't have any money, that proves you're stupid, and that's why you're with the so-called MAGA movement. We got to unpack this stuff, because the conservative voices that are saying they're never going to vote for Trump, and there's Republicans against Trump and the Lincoln Project and the Rick Wilsons and the Bill Kristols. These people are banging away on this, and they're turning Trump into a racist, a fascist, and a racist. This is ridicule. This is the Saul Alinsky model. Trump is a racist. Not proven in a court of law. He's never been criminally convicted of rape. That doesn't matter. He's a racist. He's a racist, and he's a fascist. That's who he is. Now, I'm not here to pitch Donald Trump. I'm talking about the politics. I am interested in the movement. Because if Donald Trump wins or loses in November, he's either done on the day or he's done 4 years later. This is a movement of the people. The ideas in the nationalist movement are what matter to me. Right now, Trump is the people's choice to represent this movement. And the conservatives are saying, oh, he's not a conservative. He's a leftist. He's a liberal. They put every name: rapist, racist, fascist, New York liberal. The conservative movement, like the Dick Cheneys, they're trying to put a label on Trump, to ridicule him, to do everything they can to keep him from returning to power. And they're making it very personal. And of course, Trump, not my idea of how I would handle things. I'm just going to be frank. I'm not saying I'm anti-Trump or pro-Trump. I'm just saying that style of politics, it's just not my thing. And if you've been on the Professor Penn podcast or you follow me on X, and I really hope you do, I hope you go to X, set up an account, and start building your own social media network. If people ask, well, why are better ideas not prevailing? Because they're not properly articulated and they're not properly disseminated. And this is my problem with Trump. He's riding it on top of a big ideological movement, and he's often not articulate in the way I want to hear it. But that doesn't mean other people aren't hearing it the way they want to hear it. For example, he's identified that the press is the enemy of the people. That's his thing, okay? I wouldn't use the word enemy of the people because I would consider that to be hyper-inflammatory rhetoric. But are they working against people that believe in Christianity or Judaism or have faith? Have they labeled people of faith as being intellectually inferior? Has the Democrat liberal order, which is a secular humanist order, which is not based on faith, which is the abrogation of faith of the previous thousands of years of history, actually, has it identified that faith is the problem and that they have a new faith to perform and to promote? Yes, they have. And here's Dick Cheney at the head of the show talking about how Donald Trump can never return to power, as if it's about Donald Trump for Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney couldn't give a rat's ass about Donald Trump as a person. They'll use anything to accomplish what their goal is. And their goal is to preserve the status quo of the Democrat liberal order, because that's the business model of this country. And what we're going to talk about today in terms of conservative failure is it's not a conservative political economy. It says what it is. It's the Democrat liberal order. But the conservative movement that is anti-Trump is promoting it, and they're against Trump. They're using his voluminous flaws against him because he represents a critique of and the possible dismantling of that Democrat liberal order. And if, if this is me, okay, I want to get down to the real ideas. I'm not a politician. Maybe if I was a politician, I'd be standing up and be making hyper-inflammatory comments. I hope not. I hope not, because I view everybody in this country as my fellow American citizen, and this is the way our country works. And this is another thing that's really getting to me. Both sides are saying this is the end of the democracy, which is the wrong word. It's the end of the Democratic Republic. If Trump wins, it's the end. He's going to be an authoritarian. And if Biden wins, the Democrats are going to be in power for forever. Both of these groups are saying the same thing to motivate their constituents. But actually, the thing is working. We just have to get up to 100,000 feet in the air and look down at it and say, the will of the people is engaged. The people will get to make a decision about how this turns out. And please don't talk to me about this kind of fraud or that kind of fraud or this kind of money or that kind of money. This reminds me of people come out of these different martial traditions. They start telling you who their teacher is or how they trained in this or that. At the end of the fight, one guy's standing up and the other guy's laying down. It doesn't matter who your teacher was. It's about the fight and that dog. So how this turns out, what the outcome is, first of all, hopefully, unless somebody blows the thing and we all get fried, it's going to go on for a very long time. So we don't get to see the outcome any more than the people that were there at the end of the Civil War got to see the outcome. They passed away, so will we. Even the young people watching me, your time will come, and the republic will continue on. So what the framers have given us is this incredible reality creating machine where the individual citizens get to self-govern and have a say in how this thing turns out. So if there's this kind of a problem, like, we got all these people that are saying there's all this illegal voting. Okay, how are they doing it? Well, many different ways, they allege. Great. Go to your absentee ballot board and get involved. Become a poll worker. Become an election judge. Every one of these points has a counterpoint. Why has the conservative movement failed? Because it hasn't done these things. If the conservative movement had been successful, had been a viable movement, we wouldn't have these problems. We'd have different problems, but we wouldn't have a $35 trillion debt, we wouldn't have an open border, and we wouldn't have an endless war if the conservative movement would have been, if it would have been effective and legitimate. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But before we get there, we need to take a quick trip across the news that matters. Because the news that matters, well, that's part of the failure of the conservative movement. You know, there's a lot of really important things going on. I haven't seen you for a while. I don't know what gets reported. I don't know when you watch the mainstream media. I don't know what news they're reporting because when I watch it, maybe I miss it. It seems to me like they're missing some really key issues, like President Alexander Lukashenko of the Belarusian president, threatened a possible attack on the Suwalki Gap. That's a territory that connects Poland with the Baltic states and separates the territory of the Kaliningrad Oblast from Belarus. Now, this Kaliningrad thing, it used to be called Königsberg. This is a little present that the post-World War II liberal order left to the world. It's actually a Russian province that's separated from Russia. In fact, it used to be part of East Prussia. It was German. After the war, the Germans that lived there fled, like 2 million of them. It was what you would call immigration. They ran away. The place has been populated with Russian speakers and Russian culture, but it's separated from Russia. And it happens to be one of the most important ports. It's Russia's Baltic port, at the Baltic Sea. That's where their fleet is stationed for the Baltic Sea. And it's one of the most important industrial areas of the Russian Federation. Yet it's separated from Russia by the Baltic state, particularly Lithuania. And here's Lukashenko threatening an attack. And I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. In fact, could you please play number 2? Because we actually have video evidence of this. All right, there he is himself, Lukashenko. We're going to hear him soon. He's talking to a general about the Suwalki Gap. He just visited the front on March 27th, and he's discussing his plans for an invasion with his commanders. This is no small deal because he has to attack Poland. Well, listen to him. So that we do not treat it in a simplified way, we must know for sure what they want and how much do they talk about the Suwalk corridors all the time, and how many kilometers to Russia, to the Kaliningrad region from our borders. And the general answers 42 kilometers. And he goes directly, if a straight line, and if along the border about 90. It's almost nothing, he says. In vain they behave like this. But at the moment you will have to resist the Baltic republics. And you will be taking over part of Poland, a NATO member. There is a small part, northeast. Yeah, we're going to have to take over Poland. Are you sure that this territory is on the front? Yes, it is. We're going to attack Poland, and will you be able to keep it with your troops? And the man answers, there are military planning documents, all actions. This is the general. The questions of combat readiness are being worked out. The troops are being prepared, including what is provided, set by your instructions. I mean, this is a very ritualistic threat. They're not just going to play around here. They're going to get serious about attacking Poland, which would be an Article 5 issue, which would trigger World War III. And there's the video evidence. I didn't make it up. Now, I would think this would be on every single mainstream media outlet round the clock, because what this is a prelude to World War, and it's nowhere. In fact, even to get to it here, we're going to edit it down. But man, it was behind almost like an insurmountable amount of obstacles to get to this. This was not easy. And who knows, by the time we come up here on Tuesday night, this is April 1st, Monday morning, early in the morning. This is going to go up 7:30 p.m. Central Time, April 2nd. I think it's April 2nd. Am I right? Let's see yes, I'm right. Who even knows if this will even still be available to watch? My point being, this is escalation at a profound level. And we're supposed to go about our business, have Easter, have a nice brunch, spend a bunch of money, and it's Monday, we're all back in work, and the world is contemplating going to World War like now, right now, and nobody's talking about it. That's interesting, isn't it? Let's talk about this just a little bit more. What is this Kaliningrad piece that Lukashenko is contemplating going for? Because that's a great diversion, because at the same time, the Ukrainians are falling apart, right? So the Russians are getting ready to fall, they're getting ready to finish the Ukrainians off. In fact, the Ukrainians are putting up lines of defense around Odessa, around Kyiv, around their core cities. They're falling back to what we would call their Alamos, because on the battlefield, they're just losing. And Kaliningrad, this is a little gift left to us by World War II. The city was heavily damaged by Allied bombing in 44, and during the battle, they used to call this Königsberg. It's part of East Prussia in 45. It was captured by the Soviet Union on the 9th of April, 1945. The Potsdam Agreement of 1945 placed this German territory under Soviet administration. The city was renamed Kaliningrad in 1946 in honor of Russian Bolshevik leader Mikhail Kalinin. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, has been governed as the administrative center of the Russian Kaliningrad Oblast or province, the westernmost oblast of Russia. The city is home again to the Baltic Fleet of the Russian Navy, and it's one of the largest industrial centers in Russia. This is a big deal. They want to unite. They want to eliminate the separation of the Kaliningrad region from the rest of Russia. When I say they, Lukashenko really is part of the Russian Federation. Belarus is part of the Russian Federation. And an attack on Poland leads to an immediate Article 5 general war in Europe. Great, isn't it? In the meantime, why is things heating up? Well, when I was out of town, I'm sure you noticed, maybe you didn't, there was a alleged ISIS-K attack on a concert in Moscow. Some 140 Moscovites were slaughtered in the theater. The theater burned. The Western intelligence agencies fingered ISIS-K. The Russian intelligence agencies have actually delivered evidence that ISIS-K was financed and facilitated by the Ukrainian secret agencies, the head of which they've now issued an arrest warrant for. You know, I guess a terror attack in your capital city that kills 140 citizens is going to up the bar. And, our Western intelligence agencies are saying, oh, it's ISIS, it's ISIS, it's ISIS. Who is ISIS? Who funds these people? Who moves them around? I mean, we're in Spook City here, right? We're in Spook City. I'm just going to go back to one of our previous podcasts, which you can find. Reagan sat in the Reagan White House with the leaders of the Afghanistan resistance movement to the Soviet Union that had invaded and occupied Afghanistan in the 70s. And then Carter and Reagan waged a CIA-financed and directed war using Afghani fundamentalist Muslim fighters to expel the Russians out of Afghanistan as part of their great game against Russia, which has been going back now to 1805. Recent history: 1805, war with the Russians in Russia. 1853, war with the Russians in Crimea, which is Russia. 1917, I left out 1812, when the French, Napoleon attacked Russia. 1917, after the World War I, Russia was occupied by foreign troops. 1942, the Germans attacked Russia. We had the Cold War. This thing has been going on a long time. I mean, the Russians, boy, you're going to get a bad attitude when you get attacked this many times. And I am not a Putin supporter. I'm not a Russian supporter. I'm a supporter of peace, which, again, we're going to get into this conservative failure here as we go on down the highway, because, the conservative movement is not about peace. The conservative movement is about the endless war to protect and defend democracy, to protect and defend the Democrat liberal order. Strange place for the conservatives to be. Anyhow, while this was going on, all this thing with Lukashenko, the Russians have been making a case that they were attacked their civilian citizens were attacked in their capital city by a group that were financed by the Ukrainian secret agencies, which of course are deeply tied to the CIA and MI6, which of course the Russians have said were involved. The Russian Federal Security Service leader, the head of that service, the FSB, in Alexander Bortnikov, said he believed that the Ukraine, the US, and the UK may have been involved in the terrorist attack. Okay, that's some pretty high escalation, but that's just part of it. As we escalate here, about 6 months ago, we were talking about, that F-16 fighters, which is not the most modern fighter, but it's lethal nonetheless, that they were going to let the Ukrainians have these F-16s, and they've been training Ukrainian pilots for the last 6 months, and now they're ready to deploy these F-16s, which are nuclear capable, supersonic fighter planes. They're ready to deploy them throughout the Ukrainian theater of conflict to give the Ukrainians a boost. Now, what Putin is saying is, if you station these F-16s in NATO countries and they fly sorties against the Russian Federation or Russian troops in the Ukraine, those air bases from which those F-16s take off are fair game. He's warning NATO, don't domicile these fighters. We're going to attack you. That's again another Article 5. If that was to happen, that would be another Article 5 trigger for World War III with the Russians. So, this is all escalation. I would think that on the mainstream media news, or at least when I was a kid, and I remember this, 1963, with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It wasn't as much as a crisis as what we got right now. In fact, it pales in comparison. But we had round-the-clock coverage, 24 hours a day. Every American was glued to their television set. What's going to happen next? The people were engaged. The people wanted peace. The people didn't want to die in a nuclear war. What do we got today? Everybody's watching Netflix, getting high. Nobody's paying attention. Now, is that the people's fault? Yes, it is. Because guess what? The information is out here. It's incumbent upon we, the people, to find the information. So you, my listeners, my friends, spread out this information. Your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your coworker, your friend, they might not know that our government is supporting an escalation that will very possibly lead to a nuclear war. Is this not insane? It was insane my whole life when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s. The thought of having a direct military confrontation, see now what happens? It's so mind-boggling. Can't get the word out. Confrontation. A direct military confrontation with the Russians was thought to be unthinkable, that it was to be avoided at all cost to prevent the kind of escalation we're seeing here. The only way that our friends and neighbors are going to know about it is if we tell them. Like, for example, the Russians have been continuously coming to our government and asking for peace talks, and our government, that's us, that's we, the people. We have been rebuffing the Russians consistently. According to Reuters, which is no conservative outlet, by the way, in late 2023 and early 2024, Russian intermediaries reached out to U.S. officials seeking to establish a ceasefire. The Kremlin was hoping to freeze the fighting along the current line of control. At that time, the contact with the Americans came to nothing, according to an unnamed senior Russian official. It's also well known and widely reported that Turkey and Israel actually brokered a peace deal between Zelensky and Putin at the start of the war, which was circumvented and derailed by, again, we the people. So we have this escalation. Let's take a look at number 3, just to let you know how wild this is getting. As for Poland's leaders, they are quite possibly counting on forming some kind of coalition under the NATO umbrella. to get directly involved in the Ukrainian conflict in order to tear off a good chunk of Ukraine for themselves, to take back their historic lands, as they think of them, currently Western Ukraine. It is well known that they also dream of Belarusian lands as well. As for the Ukrainian regime's policy, it's their business. If they want to betray their country, to sell some things as traders do, to repay their owners, that's their business. We won't get involved. But as for Belarus, it's part of the Union state. Aggression against the Belarus will mean aggression against the Russian Federation. We will respond to it with all means at our disposal. In 1939, Poland was abandoned by its Western allies and it was thrown to the German war machine and formally lost its independence and statehood, which was restored in large part thanks to the Soviet Union. It was thanks to the Soviet Union, thanks to steps taken by Stalin, that Poland regained substantial territories in the West, German lands, and this is a fact. Western Polish territories are Stalin's gift to Poland. Have our friends in Warsaw forgotten about it? We'll give them a reminder. Putin's got a great sense of humor, doesn't he? This guy's hilarious. And people are going to say, I like Putin. No, I do not like Putin. This has nothing to do with being a Putin apologist, Putin supporter. I just want peace, and I really don't think that this great game that goes on in Europe, that goes back to the old world order, because this is the settling of scores left from the old world order, like this Kaliningrad peace. Here's a piece of Russia that's separated from Russia. Almost like somebody left a war in the future, should someone want to play the card. Because it's crazy to have a part of the country separated from the country. This is just not the way countries are. It's separated for a reason. It's separated for a reason. You know, those of us who have spent a lot of time with contracts and attorneys, you know, a lot of times attorneys will leave undefined terms, which beg for litigation down the road because that's how they make their money. So if you were in the military-industrial complex and you wanted to almost guarantee that sometime in the future, after a rest period, people would go back to war and have to buy weapons and kill each other with them weapons, which you make money on, you would leave a piece of a country separated from the motherland. And that's exactly what's happened here. In the meantime, President Biden has requested a record $895 billion in military spending for the 2025 fiscal year, with the interest involved will easily exceed $1.5 trillion. You throw in the research and the black bag money, $2.5 trillion goes to the defense of democracy and the ongoing Pax Americana known as the post-World War II Democrat liberal order. $2.5 trillion, that would be the money that, I don't know, maybe would take care of some of our problems around the campfire here at home. But not these people, not the Dick Cheneys with his cowboy hat. He doesn't care about that. That's not his thing. As a matter of fact, when he wasn't screwing up the government with false claims of weapons of mass destruction or promoting torture as a legitimate means of pursuing American policy, this is who this guy was. You know, remember that? The never found weapons of mass destruction? Never found them. The reason to go into Iraq and depose Saddam Hussein was the imminent threat that he posed to the American people. Never found them. Didn't exist. And when we were there, oh, well, you know, we had to torture people. And this guy actually presided over a torturous regime. That's who we are. We're going to talk about that. That's the conservative movement. And I got a lot of conservatives that watch me. And we need to get clear about this because every American nationalist is a reformed conservative. And we're going to try to reform some people tonight. So, you know, we have all this money going into the military. And within the most recent expenditure, when they had a $1.2 trillion government funding package, that President Biden just recently signed into law to keep the government open, hey, 1.2 trillion. What's 3.8 billion? Not very much compared to 1.2 trillion, but almost $4 trillion of military aid go $4 billion of military aid goes directly to Israel as part of this last funding. We're going to talk about that this week because there's some real problems in the Democrat big tent over this Palestinian-Israel issue. So we got a lot of really unpleasant news that matters. I can't even cover it all and get done tonight. I've been gone. But before we go on, I just do want to say, if you're enjoying this content, you know, we work very hard at this. We're internally financing the growth of Free People Radio through two mediums. Number one, please go to freepeopleradio.com. We have a store there. I just, for a friend of mine, got a couple of Godspeed t-shirts, which I intend to deliver this week. We got some really nice wearables and kitchenware, and you got to buy your t-shirts and your kitchenware from somebody. If you buy them from us, we have ongoing funding to continue creating this content. And the big one is tireget.com. That's TIREGET.com. That's an online e-commerce tire store. Everything you need to buy in tires, major brands, private labels. We do the service. The price is right. You get the tires put on right by your house. And here's a short bit about TireGet. TireGet, TIREGET.com. TireGet is here for the movement and for all the broadcasters and channels and stations that are presenting this content for you. TireGet is an online e-commerce platform where you can buy your tires. Now, everybody buys tires, or most of us buy tires. There's everything there that you need for your vehicles. All kinds of different brands, premium major brands, premium private label brands, every kind of tire. You go there, you pick your tire. We will ship the tires to the installer right by your house at no extra charge. You pay TireGet to have your tires installed. It's a one-stop shop for everything you need in tires and the best customer service in the tire business. So the next time you buy tires, think of TireGet. You got to buy your tires from someone. Please buy them from us. Welcome back. All right, we got the soap selling out of the way. We would appreciate your support. Thank you very much. Whatever you can do with us. We really do appreciate and need it. Now, let's get into the conservative failure. We're going to start out with a piece from a great movie called Syriana. And it's going to seem a little bit off the beaten path, but I'm going to bring it around the corner. Please stay with me. I'm playing this. It's like playing The Godfather. I get to play some of the pieces from my favorite movies. If you've never heard of Syriana, it stars George Clooney. And it's really the story of blowback being what happens when the U.S. government goes out and does something, and then what are the unintended consequences from that foreign policy. Please play number 3.
مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين سيحاولون طمس الاختلاف.
They will try to disguise the difference to make Muslims who speak about religion appear to be fanatics or backward people. They will tell us the dispute is over economic resources or military domination. If we believe that, we play right into their hands, with only ourselves to blame. It is not possible to bridge the divide between human nature and modern life through free trade. Impossible. The divine and the worldly are but a single concept. The Quran. No separation of religion and state. The Quran. Instead of kings legislating and slaves obeying, the Quran. The pain of modern life cannot be cured by deregulation, privatization, economic reform, or lower taxes. The pain of living in the modern world will never be solved by a liberal society. Liberal societies have failed. Christian theology has failed. The West has failed. Okay, now we're into the subject matter of today's podcast, the failure of the conservative movement. Now, I played this because it's an extreme. Sometimes you look at the extreme to work your way back in. What was the Imam saying in this movie, Syriana? He was saying that the Democrat liberal order has failed. That failure is obvious if you look at it from a street corner that have the eyes to see it. What are the failures? They're too numerous to list. We always list the easy ones, which is $35 trillion of debt and an open border and an endless war, which is profound. Those three are profound. But we talk about drug abuse and depression and mental illness and physical illness and the existential emptiness that is associated with unbridled materialism. Because let's remember, what is the Democrat liberal order? What is it? What is it? What is it? It stands on two pillars. The order stands on two pillars: the coercion of American military might and nuclear weapons, which is basically the pillar of science, and then the pillar of the U.S. dollar or of materialism. This is a deeply materialistic order. Science and money. Those are the pillars upon which our culture has been erected. And what this imam is saying is that this is wholly inadequate to bridge the gap between human nature and the existential pain of life for the average citizen, that privatization and low taxes, in other words, materialism, will not solve the angst that is suffered by the human being that lives in this post-World War II Democrat liberal order. Now, the Imam's proposal is the Quran, and they're entitled to have an answer to this Democrat liberal order. They're entitled to. And what they're struggling with on their street corner is the interrelationship between imperialism and colonialism and Islamic faith, because they see imperialism and colonialism as a direct threat against their faith. In other words, at the beginning of the piece, he said, people that speak about faith will be cast as being backward or stupid, which is the very same thing that's happening in our country. If you take a look at the news or the commentating, what they're saying is that if you believe in God or you're part of the Trump movement, you're a maggot. You're stupid somehow. You're uneducated. Because this movement is a movement that rewards the PhDs. They're the ones who run it. It's their program, and it's using science and money to overthrow the previous order, which really in the West was Christianity. In the Middle East, it was Islam. This order has decided that religion and nationalism, religious nationalism in particular, is a great threat. And in so doing, in becoming a counterpoint to religious nationalism, it has become a religion itself, secular humanism, and an endless war to defeat and to control what it views to be the enemy. In other words, it's become the thing that it itself was erected to defend against. And the conservatives are in on this, okay? The conservative, first of all, I've been saying this for almost the entire series of podcasts. Conservative and liberal, it's not a good description of our politics. We need to think about globalism and nationalism. When we do it, when we use those words, all this politics gets much easier to understand. And the root here is 1946. That's when this post-World War II Democrat liberal order was established, and it stands really on the Atlantic Charter, which we've covered in great depth. But let's think about the conservatives now who are saying we're never voting for Trump, that we need true conservatism, like a Ron DeSantis or a Nikki Haley. What are they selling? Okay. The coercion of the American military in its alliances, its nuclear weapons systems, the placement of the United States military everywhere in the world, there is nothing conservative about that. This country was formed in 1776 as an anti colonial, anti imperialist political movement of the people. It was a pop. No, it was an intellectual movement. There was a lot of elites, but it was a movement of the people solely focused on rejecting empire. The colonists did not want to be part of the British Empire. It was a repudiation of empire. So if we were conserving that original impulse of 1776 here in 1946 and then again in 2024, we would not be promoting as conservatives a worldwide empire. It is in disharmony with what we're trying to preserve, which is the spirit of 1776 and the Constitution of this country. So at its root, the worldwide empire of the United States, it's not conservative. It's the Democrat liberal order. And if you're conservative and you're watching me, and I got a lot of blowback when I criticized Reagan because he really accelerated this thing, both from a military perspective and from a financial perspective. It really goes back far deeper than Reagan. It goes right back to 46. But my point is, when we say that it's conservative to promote this order and Trump is a threat to the order, remember I said they're telling you Trump's a racist and a rapist and a fascist to discredit him, but it's his critique of the order that they're really concerned about. And he is very aware of what he's doing. He's fighting the power, and the power is saying, you're no good. And the conservatives that are not with Trump have separated themselves from the MAGA movement. And what I'm doing is I'm talking to you, I'm saying, you're not really being conservative. You're really being a liberal. And let's try to sort this out because we've all been confused by this politics. And as it becomes more and more clear, maybe we're going to get a lot of conservative people that are going to say, whoa, this is not really conservative. You know, I'm thinking about here in Minnesota, like the Tea Party Patriots. Come on. You're in with the liberals, and maybe you're going to have a change of heart, as did I. So the very nature of the empire is anti-conservative. It's Democrat liberal. The enmeshment in Europe and in Asia. You know, we've got NATO in Europe and we've got the Five Eyes in Asia. These are just imperial formations which are against our founding energies, our founding ideas, our founding documents. And this enmeshment negates the Monroe Doctrine. You know, we had that Monroe Doctrine, which said, you know, President Monroe, hey, don't come into the Western Hemisphere, you European colonial powers, you kings and queens. Stay out. And the very enmeshment in NATO and the Five Eyes really, it really undermines that Monroe Doctrine. It makes us borderless. And of course, we are borderless. Our military is borderless. Our country is borderless. How are those two things related? How are those two things related? If our military might, if we're running a worldwide empire that knows no borders, is it any surprise that we don't have any borders? We have no borders. We're blaming the wrong people. We're thinking about this in the wrong way. That's why we have such a clear message about this in the nationalist movement. We have to restore our borders, both physical and spiritual, because when we restore our spiritual border, which means we rein in our ambitions, our globalist ambitions now have a spiritual border, our physical borders will return as if by magic because they're related. Now, until 1972, the Republican Party, going back to the Whigs and the Know Nothings, was opposed to free trade. It was opposed to immigration, which was a shortcoming of the party, the immigration piece, because it allied itself. This is before the Republican Party. We had the Whigs and the Know Nothings. The Know Nothings were an anti-immigration Antifa, and the methods that it used to oppose even legal immigration were at best could be called draconian. At the worst, they were terrorists. So, the party, the people that are in the Republican Party have always been about American manufacturing and been anti-free trade. And of course, if you think about free trade, that's the Democrat thing. What's the freest of all free trade? That would be the trade in slaves. So, the Republican Party is a spiritual movement, was about human well-being, and it was about freedom, and it was about the success and well-being of the American citizen. So the Republican Party was always about high tariffs, high duties, protect American manufacturing, build an American economy. And then the Democrat was, hey, we're going to trade all over the world, free trade. That was what they experimented with. But after 46, when the world lay in ruins and the United States had the only intact industrial base in the world, everything else was just bombed to smithereens. The Republican Party and the Democrat Party aligned around a money grab that was associated with free trade. And of course, the United States from 1946 to 1976, that's 30 years. We ran a trade surplus for 30 years because it took the world about 30 years to rebuild its manufacturing and trade infrastructure. But once it had been rebuilt, because, of course, our country had no competition, so our costs just kept going up, up, up. In the mid 70s, we started to get severely undercut in price, and we started to run this trade deficit. But the country had become addicted to and had become ideologically focused on free trade, and that was in both parties, which was now a uni party. And it was the Republican Party in 1972 which really opened up the China business. And so the Republican Party became the great purveyor of free trade. And in fact, because one thing becomes its opposite, we probably need to do a whole podcast on the yin yang of politics. The Democrat Party, which had been the free trade party, because it was allegedly the Workers' Party at that time, I'm going back in the 90s, became stridently anti-China, and the Republican Party became the party of business that was protecting the China trade. These things get a little bit complicated unless you look at it. Who's the globalist and who's the nationalist? Who's BSing for votes and who's sincere about what they're doing? And the Uni Party in total has been full of S for a very long time. Things are starting to sort themselves out. But the Republican Party was not a free trade party. It was a American manufacturing party. It sold its soul out to money. And once that had been done, now we have a bunch of Republicans that are focused on low taxes, low regulation, free trade, a bunch of Republican conservatives that are focused on maintaining the empire, maintaining the U.S. military's dominance throughout the world. And, my point is these two pillars that underlie this liberal order, they're just not conservative. So the conservatives that are with Nikki Haley, that are with Ron DeSantis, that are saying it's Trump, 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 can't vote for him, which that's got nothing to, in my theory of the case, it's got nothing to do with it. What they're really doing is just using Trump to try to discredit this nationalist movement. And this is nothing new. The same playbook was run in the 1930s with, for example, Father Coughlin, who had a very similar populist movement, a very similar America First movement. It was called America First, and he was discredited as being a anti-Semite and an isolationist and a fascist. And of course, when the war broke out, because the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and of course, there's lots of historical warp and woof about how that came down, President Roosevelt had all he needed to eliminate that movement and go all in on the globalism of world war. And we sit here at that same crossroads right now where the America First movement, today's America First movement, which, by extension, we're all rapists. we're all racists and we're all fascists. And I'm called that frequently when I just talk about peace online. People call me a Putin lover, a fascist, whatever. You know, I'm just interested in the well being of my family and my neighborhood. And for the conservatives in Minnesota and throughout the country who are rejecting Trump, okay, you know what? I'm just going to say, and I'm going to say it again. He's not my cup of tea because he doesn't speak to me in the way I want to listen. But to me, it's not about Trump. It's about these ideas underneath. What is really conservative? What's really conservative is borders, borders, and beware of foreign entanglements. That's 1776 talk. We went to war to establish an American border and to extricate ourselves from an empire. Hey, you want to conserve something? Conserve that. We had an American manufacturing base that we protected with high duties and high tariffs, and we had a very productive working class. That's conservative. We don't, people say, oh, well, we're taxing, a tariff is a tax on the American citizens. You hear that all the time from the conservatives. Yes, it is. Costs are going to go up or be a little bit higher if we manufacture here in the United States, but we'll have an independent America. And all those jobs we're going to create will help us pay down this voluminous $35 trillion debt. So you look at the problems of the country, debt, how do we get out of that? Build things here. Okay, very simple. Build things here. How do we take care of the American people? Have a border, spiritual and physical. And you end that endless war. Now you're really creating true conservatism, not faux conservatism. Everybody that was born after 46 lives in a faux conservatism, and that's juxtaposed to Marxism. Well, hey, you know what? I'm not going to get caught up in this, right? I want to really conserve the beauty of what our country was intended to be, and that's self-governing. Self-governing. Self-governance relies and depends upon, internal spiritual borders. That's what we're working here on the Professor Penn podcast. So what I'm trying to lay out here is a case that conservatism has failed because it's not conservative. It's liberal. It's the Democrat liberal order. And if enough conservatives can get this thinking and, really consider it between now and the election in November, they might be able to look past Trump and look at what the conservative movement is really promoting, which is free trade and a worldwide empire, and say, whoa, that's not conservative. And maybe some of you will become reformed globalists, become nationalists like every other nationalist who is reformed globalist. And then some of you, hey, just go over with the Democrats and caucus there. Go caucus with the globalists because that's who you are, and you're an American citizen and you get a vote, and that's cool. And what we're doing here on the podcast and what I'm doing on X is trying to help people see, because I went through this myself. I mean, I'm not trying to put anything on anybody. This is my own process of going, whoa, what's going on here? What's going on? And it goes right into my local community because these spiritual borders, this is part of the conservative failure. So let's just talk about an easy one. Sex. Let's just talk about sex. Could you play number 4?
Thank you so much for bringing this bill forward. And, I, as a parent, really hope the practice of telling our children when they should have sex, which is what abstinence-based sex education is, can stop happening. Because I think it's weird when adults tell children when they should be having sex, no matter when that is. So I hope that they will look at that and these standards too. Thank you.
Can you play it one more time because it went by so quick?
Thank you so much for bringing this bill forward. And, I, as a parent, really hope the practice of telling our children when they should have sex, which is what abstinence-based sex education is, can stop happening. Because I think it's weird when adults tell children when they should be having sex, no matter when that is. So I hope that they will look at that and these standards too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a Minnesota elected representative in the Minnesota state legislature talking about abstinence education and saying, hey, it's really weird when parents tell their children not to have sex or who to have sex with. It's just creepy, in her opinion. And she's a young woman who's probably got kids. And I'm just going to talk about sex for a few minutes. Because guess what? I'm on the front lines of this, okay? I was a fully functioning teenager in 1972 when the pill swept my high school. Virtually every girl, young woman in my high school went for their well-being checkup. Got to have our well-being checkups before we go back to school. And the doctors were so nice to ask these young girls, are you having periods? And the girls said yes, because they were at that age. Is your period heavy? How's the girl supposed to know? It's unpleasant. Of course, I don't know, but I've got plenty of reports over a lifetime. Not pleasant. No, it's not pleasant. Oh, well, I have a pill for you. It'll make your periods much easier to deal with. It'll regulate your period. It'll come at the same time. It'll come on time. It'll be much easier. Here, take this pill. I know I was there. The girls that, reported to me directly, they didn't even know it was a birth control pill. They thought it was a period regulation pill. But the truth seeped out. And by 1973, 1 year later, my high school was an orgy. Okay? So we went in 1 year. I can remember the names of the students that had out-of-wedlock children in 1971 and 72. One couple happened to be an interracial couple. And just on the chance that they're still around, I'm not going to mention their names. One of them was a good friend of mine. In fact, one of them had gone to elementary school with me. And he was one of the first 4 black students bused into Highland Park in St. Paul. And I can remember all 4 of the names of those black kids that came in, one of whom became a really good friend of mine. And man, we got into high school, and boy, that pill came, and boy, Katie barred the doors. It was off to the races we went. And then in 73, it was Roe versus Wade. So you had a backup plan. If things didn't work out with the pill, you had a backup. And, that was the beginning. Of course, the sexual revolution that began in the 60s with the hippie movement. And I'm not saying people hadn't had sex out of wedlock since Christ made corporal. This has been going on forever. But it suddenly became scientifically possible to eliminate the downside of sex out of wedlock. And when people figured out that, hey, it was whatever, and it was whatever really quickly. And of course, we weren't conservatives or liberals at that time. I was there. We weren't even thinking about it. Now, of course, we were anti-war, a lot of us. So a lot of us were, gravitating over to the Democrat Party. And, I came from a super political family. So, of course, I was, gravitated over there. But people weren't like burning up with politics. We were burning up with lust. And nobody said lust is a deadly sin or there's a spiritual border around it, because there was no abstinence education, because we all had gone into 7th grade biology class. And the first thing we learned was the story of Genesis was a fairy tale. We had scientific truth called the origin of the species. So the entire religious education that had previously been in place for thousands of years was undone in over 100 years by the Masons, by Galton, by Spencer and Darwin. We went over to a new description of reality called, origin of the species, survival of the fittest. It was no longer Adam and Eve. That story went away. So young men missed the importance of that parable or that story, and we were given a new story. And guess what that story was? The person with the most money, who was the physically strongest, got breeding rights. And boy, guess what? Everybody started lifting weights, everybody started working out, and everybody got focused on, guess what? Making money. And that was the materialism of the Reagan era. And nobody talked about, I don't want to say nobody, There was Baptist ministers railing against this. And you know how they took care of those folks? They were racists. And many of them were, which helped them get discredited. But nobody was talking to my generation of young people that this kind of unfettered, unrestrained sexuality had any downside. Where were the conservatives? Now, they were out there. I'm not saying they weren't out there, but nobody was listening to them. And I don't want to say nobody, because I'm sure there was some people listening to them. But I'm going to tell you, in my high school, and there was 1,100 kids in my graduating class, anybody that could did. In other words, if you could, you weren't a virgin, and that was just the way it was. So, where was the conservatism? Well, it went right down the hopper, because our parents, they were out, experimenting with sexual freedom also. In other words, the conservative movement was quite liberal when it came to their own sexual gratification. They put up no resistance to that. Was there some resistance? Of course there was. And if you came from a family that taught abstinence or taught the traditional way, that's great. I came from a family. Hey, guess, newsflash, we didn't speak English in the house, okay? I had it. It was there. My grandparents, first of all, would have never talked to me about it, because that would have been considered unnecessary. They left it to my parents. And my parents, hey, they didn't do anything. My mother was a bra burner. She was at the front lines of the women's rights movement. She believed in the right of women to determine their own sexual futures and their own sexual freedoms. That was her belief system. So, of course, hey, I thought, cool for me, works for me just fine. So where was the conservative movement when it came to that one issue? It failed. It failed the society. It didn't conserve anything. It became quite liberal. And let's just, as long as we're taking a pass on this, it's, the drugs, when we're sitting around at those parties, people didn't sort themselves out. Hey, I'm conservative. I don't smoke dope. BS. They smoked dope. They did coke. They did the Quaaludes. There was a failure there too. A complete failure and breakdown of the conservative movement. The spiritual borders necessary to restrain these behaviors with spiritual borders were not provided by the conservative movement, by the church movement, however you want to say it. The conservative movement failed. So it failed in terms of maintaining the borders of the country established at its founding, and instead supported replacing our borders with a borderless worldwide military empire. That's failure. The humility and the humbleness that comes with self-sufficiency was replaced by unbridled materialism associated with Darwinism. Did the conservative movement preserve faith in God? No. The conservative movement went all in on get all the money you can, get all the strength you can, and you get breeding rights in a world that has no sexual restraint. This was not a success of the conservative movement. It failed. And the big failure was the very pillars upon which our culture rests, science and money, have no place in them for any spiritual life for the people. That's why I played the piece from Syriana, where the Imam says, modern world, the liberal society has failed and cannot address the ennui or the pain of modern life. The conservative movement has failed the people. And if we really get good about this here in the movement at Free People Radio, where a lot of ideas come from that spread out through the movement, we can become very creative together as a community to rebalance, to recast our culture. I'm not saying I'm anti-science. I'm saying we need some spiritual insight to temper the scientific. And when we restore that balance, we're going to have a much better country a much healthier populace. And we have to, as conservatives, now I'm a reformed conservative, now I'm a nationalist. But when we look at this as conservatives, if you've tuned in and you're never voting for Trump and you love Ron DeSantis, like Dustin, who I'm constantly thanking for letting me post into his threads. And I know a lot of people in Minnesota are reading what I'm posting. Let's think through what we're supporting. Let's think it through. Now, there is a third rail of politics, and they call that, the social benefit programs. Well, here's a third rail: veterans, the military. And the reason why it's a third rail, well, the reason it's a third rail is because that's the basis of our political economy. In other words, everything in this country is based on an empire, okay? That's why it's a third rail. But how do they do it? Just like they're using Trump to discredit the nationalist movement, they use the self-sacrifice of the veteran to protect the empire. In other words, the courage and service of the individual American citizen is used to protect a really anti-American kind of worldwide globalist, borderless empire, which is the United States of America. We're an imperial power. And the veterans, they're all in on it. Not all of them. I mean, I'm going to just say right here, I'm going to get a lot of blowback for this, and I'm going to go right down this road for as long as it takes. Because here in Minnesota, politically, in the Republican Party, it's run by the military. And I say the military. It's the ex-military. Is there really ever any ex-military? No. And why do I say no? Well, the 2024 budget for military compensation is $551 billion. That represents an increase of 144% since 1980, 134% since 1999, and that's with removing any effect of inflation. In other words, personnel payments and benefits take up approximately 40% of the total Defense Department budget. These people are on the payroll. So when we go to these state Central Committee meetings or the Minnesota State Republican Convention, and Representative Tom Emmer stands up and says, if you're ex-military, military, stand up so we can salute you, and a quarter of the room stands up, first of all, these people have a basis in selflessness and service, and that's to be commended and supported. But for those of us that have been through any kind of basic training, the point of that training is to strip your personality and all your thinking down till you're just a killing machine. And then you have your brain programmed by the people who are your seniors. When you're standing there in the sun and you can't count backwards from 10 to 1, you have heat stroke. Everybody should take a shot at this sometime when you've been trained so hard in the sun that you can't count from 1. You go 1, 2, 6, 4. You can't count to 10 because, they've taken you past your physical limits. That's the moment they start telling you how the cow chews the cud, because you have no spiritual borders at that point. They've been removed through physical exertion and through emotional perturbation, or in my case, emotional abuse. So my point is, all the people that went through this kind of training have a deep attachment and tie to the military. And I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm going to say if you're a veteran, look at the worldwide empire that you fought to defend. And, truth be told, most of the people didn't do the fighting. Okay, now, these are the sacred cows, the third rails. Yes, your life was at risk. And yes, I respect you. Yes, I respect you. But it seems to me that in my experience, the guys that actually dressed up in strange costumes and went into the community and were doing the dirty work at night hand to hand, those people don't seem to want to kill anybody anymore. You know, my best friends that actually, they weren't, there was no safety for those people. There was no safety for anybody. I get it. But I'm talking to people that really were doing the deal. They don't seem to be so pro killing. Or as one friend said to me, I've killed all the people I want to kill. I'm done. Okay. You know, I don't want to portray myself as a veteran or as ex-military. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is if you are a veteran, please look at what you're defending. Please look at the failure of the conservative movement. Please read about the history of the country. And I recognize that our veterans are on the payroll, and I recognize that our veterans have served, and I recognize their best friends and their best memories and the best days of their life were probably when their life was on the line, depending on the other people that they were serving with. I get all that. I get it really organically. But that doesn't excuse American citizens from looking at the truth. And as long as we're afraid to call out our veterans and say, please, please, sir, please, listen to the people. The people that haven't served want peace. The people that haven't served do not want to be involved in foreign wars and foreign entanglements. The people that haven't served don't want the sum total of their efforts to be taken away from them through inflation so that the empire can be maintained. The people don't want this. And I understand many of the veterans do support it. And I'm just saying to the veterans today, when I say conservatism failed, and many of the veterans, at least half of them, and my naive kind of look at it, they're Democrats. So if you're a conservative veteran, you know there's a lot of Democrat veterans. And as well, there should be service, country. These are important fundamental parts of service. But we got to sort through it because the people are getting used. What does Boeing or Halliburton have to do with the service of the individual veteran who put his life on the line? Yes, you put your life on the line. Yes, I respect you. I really, truly respect you. I really, truly respect you because I understand. But I'm appealing to you to look at what the military has become because many of you get it. And I want the military people that get it to find free people, that we have a voice, that we start to say that we want a strong military. We want to be able to defend the country. We want to be able to defend the borders of the country. But we do not want a worldwide empire in an endless war. That is not conservative. How did that become the military's mission? To pursue an endless war to promote a Democrat liberal order, which seems not to reflect the values of military training as it was, at least back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I mean, I don't know what they're training people to do today, but boy, it seems in stark contradiction to the world that I grew up in. So I'm asking, and I don't have the answers about how to handle this. And I know I'm going to get a lot of blowback. But we have a lot of military members that are standing up strongly for empire, and they cannot be criticized because they served. And while their service is to be admired, defended, revered, their political perspective is fair game for critique. So, what I've tried to lay out tonight is that the underpinnings of our culture, because our culture is the Democrat liberal order, is illegitimate. That coercion at the point of a bayonet and coercion through financial manipulation and free trade, these are illegitimate pillars upon which our country rests. And that the conservative movement has been usurped through greed and lust by its individual members. I mean, I'm just saying it's the individual participants in the culture who did not maintain spiritual borders around their sexuality or around their greed specifically. Some of them there was arrogance, some was wrath. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that spiritual borders get undermined. But in my opinion, the two prominent ones was, lust and greed, because the boomer generation came up and was educated, the first generation fully given over to the origin of the species and the survival of the fittest, and that if you got all the money you could get, you'd have breeding rights in the society, which now was open to you because there was no spiritual borders around sexuality. This was the end of the conservative movement as it had existed before World War II. Before World War II, it was an anti-imperial, pro-U.S. manufacturing movement. And after the war, it became an imperial movement and a free trade global business movement. Let us get back and reform ourselves. Let us be reformed globalists and become nationalists. Let us be reformed conservatives and become nationalists, because the Republican Party is now becoming a nationalist party. So I'm really speaking to all the Ron DeSantis voters, all the Nikki Haley voters, all the people that could never vote for Trump because Trump is a and a racist and a fascist. And I'm going to go online right here and say, again, third time, it's not my cup of tea. But I'm interested in the ideas underneath the politicians. The politicians are salespeople. What are the ideas of the nationalist movement? Restore our borders, both physical and spiritual, for the well-being of the people. Number two, turn $35 trillion of public debt into private assets for the well-being of the people. And number three, end the endless war for the well-being of the people. And if we could do that as a group, if we could have the courage as individual citizens to look at our intellectual beliefs and parse through them very carefully and look at the history and then evolve, give ourselves the space to change. I know I have a lot of friends that say to me, man, I'm the same as I was when I graduated high school when I was 18. Like they're proud of that. Like I didn't change. Like that's some kind of positive thing. And there is something positive about it. It means you have integrity. But if you have integrity to illegitimate ideas, you've wasted your life on illegitimacy. So what I'm trying to say, with all my respect for the veterans, all my respect for the people, for my fellow citizens, we are smart enough to figure out these ideas and liberate ourselves from lies, because the truth shall set us free. On that note, I want to wish you well. Look forward to seeing you again on Thursday, God willing. It's great to be back. I'm a little rusty today. Thanks for putting up with me. We're going to get right back on beam, and I wish to improve myself using this break. My thinking's getting clearer. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get our thinking clear enough that we can see these ideas and give ourselves the space to change, the space to evolve. Thank you very much. Look forward to seeing you soon again.